At Christmas dinner, they placed a bet that I would break down the moment they handed me divorce papers. My husband's best friend laughed and said, "She'll cry, just wait. Women always do." Stay with me as I share what really happened that night. And remember to support our channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. The dining room glowed with soft lights from the tree, the scent of roast and cinnamon filling the air. Laughter had been steady all evening, glasses raised, cheerful voices overlapping. From the outside, it was the picture of a perfect family holiday. I sat at the table, my hands resting quietly in my lap, watching Corbin, my husband, bask in the attention. He loved being admired. Talon, his closest friend, lounged beside him, smirking as if he knew a secret. I felt the shift before it happened. The way Corbin straightened his back, the way Talon leaned forward with eager eyes. They had rehearsed this moment. "Maris," Corbin said smoothly, his voice carrying across the table. He slid a stack of papers toward me. "I think you'll find this is for the best." Forks paused midair, chatter cut off instantly. The crisp white pages sat in front of me, divorce papers, already bearing his signature. A small, ugly laugh broke the silence. "Go on," Talon grinned, tapping the table. "This is where she cries. I told you so." Every gaze turned to me, waiting. They wanted tears, anger, humiliation. They wanted me broken. I picked up the pen. No trembling, no hesitation. In a single stroke, I wrote my name neatly on the line. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was the only noise in the room. Then I slid the papers back across the table, meeting Corbin's eyes without flinching. "Done," I said quietly. The air changed. Corbin's confident mask slipped, only slightly, but enough for me to notice. Talon shifted in his seat, his smirk fading at the edges. Around the table, the family stared in stunned silence, uncertain what to say, what to think. I reached down and lifted a small box, wrapped neatly in silver paper with a bow. I set it in the center of the table, pushing it toward them with steady hands. "I didn't come empty-handed," I said with a faint smile. The box sat there between the wine glasses and untouched plates. Corbin stared at it as though it might explode. Talon leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The others didn't dare move. The tree lights flickered against the polished dishes, shadows stretching across the table. I sat back in my chair, calm, waiting. No one knew what I had placed inside that little box. My name is Maris. For 8 years I was married to Corbin, a man who knew how to impress a room. He carried himself with charm, always polished, always certain people admired him. From the outside, it seemed like he had everything under control. I used to think that was true. When we first met, I believed I had found stability. He made promises, painted pictures of a future filled with success, and I wanted to believe every word. I had built my life slowly, carefully, working hard for every step. He seemed like someone who could match that effort. For a while, it felt like we were partners moving in the same direction. But Corbin was never content with simply living a steady life. He wanted praise at every turn. Compliments weren't enough. He needed to be the smartest, the most admired, the one people leaned toward in every conversation. When that attention slipped, he became restless, always chasing the next way to feel important. Talon, his closest friend, fed that restlessness. Talon had a loud laugh, a sharp tongue, and the kind of confidence that never paused to question itself. He was around so often that his presence became routine in our home. At first, I told myself it was harmless, two friends spending time together. But it was hard to ignore how his words cut through the air. Jokes at my expense, sly remarks about what Corbin could do better without me, all delivered with a grin. Corbin never stopped him. Sometimes he even laughed along. Looking back, the warning signs had been there early on. Nights when Corbin claimed he was buried in work, but came home smelling of cologne that wasn't his own. Calls he stepped out to take, speaking in low tones, his eyes flicking away if I walked too close. I noticed, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I thought marriage meant patience, trust, giving space. So I let it slide. I was the one who kept everything steady. I worked, I saved, I made sure bills were paid and plans were made. Corbin liked to stand in the spotlight, but I was the one keeping the ground beneath us firm. Still, he acted as if my effort was invisible, as though it was simply expected. The more I tried to bridge the distance between us, the further he drifted. He became sharper with his words, always pointing out small faults in the way I spoke, cooked, or carried myself. He wasn't cruel in the obvious way. He preferred to chip at me piece by piece, so others would never notice. I stayed silent, convincing myself things would balance out. I remembered the man he had been when we met, the promises, the warmth. I held on to that memory far too long. Even as it grew clear it was fading. By the time I realized how far things had gone, the cracks were already spreading too wide to hide. Corbin's shift was not sudden, but it was steady, like the slow dimming of a light. He stopped sharing small details of his day, no longer reaching for me with warmth. Instead, he spoke only to point out flaws I hadn't noticed, a missed button, a dish not set exactly right, the way I phrased a thought. Each remark was delivered so smoothly that it could almost pass as casual, but over time they carried a sting that didn't fade. When Talon was near, the atmosphere changed even more. He acted as if he knew our marriage better than I did. His jokes were disguised as clever, but there was always something beneath them, a jab meant to unsettle me. He spoke louder when I entered a room, often turning Corbin's attention away from me. The two of them would laugh at stories I wasn't part of, and though they never said it directly, I felt excluded in my own space. Corbin seemed to prefer Talon's company over mine. The evenings we used to spend together dwindled. Instead, I watched him get dressed to go out, always with the same explanation. It's just Talon. Sometimes they went to bars, sometimes they stayed out late for reasons left vague. The pattern repeated often enough that it no longer felt like coincidence. It wasn't only his behavior that unsettled me. Strange details began surfacing, and each one added to the unease I couldn't shake. A bill tucked into a pocket that didn't match the story he told. Withdrawals from our account with no explanation. Charges for meals at places we had never visited together. I noticed his phone was never left unattended anymore. The screen always faced down, and if it buzzed, he silenced it before I could see. The house itself felt different. Where there had once been conversations that stretched into the night, now silence hung heavy between us. I tried asking about the changes, careful not to sound accusing, but Corbin deflected with ease. His replies were short, clipped, and designed to end the subject quickly. If I pressed further, his expression hardened, and I learned to stop before his irritation boiled over. I had spent years building a life with him, and for a while I convinced myself that every marriage had difficult stretches. But this was not a passing storm. The way he looked through me, as if I were no longer part of his plans, told me something had shifted deeper than I wanted to admit. The more time he gave to Talon, the less space there was for me. Their bond grew while mine with him frayed. And though I still managed our home, kept everything in order, I couldn't ignore the feeling that the ground beneath me was quietly being pulled away, piece by piece, while they both watched. It began with a slip, the kind Corbin never expected me to notice. I was clearing out the desk one evening when a folded paper slid from between two folders. At first glance it looked like another routine expense, but the names and places didn't fit. High-end jewelry, designer stores, private clubs. Items I had never received, nights out I had never attended. The purchases were bold, careless even, and yet carefully hidden away as if I'd never see them. I didn't confront him. Instead, I tucked the paper into my pocket and carried on as though nothing had changed. But inside, a quiet decision formed. I had to know the truth with my own eyes. So the next time Corbin mentioned an evening out for business, I waited until he left, then followed. He wasn't cautious. He drove with the confidence of someone convinced he had no reason to be watched. The trail led me across town, to a lively district where the streets pulsed with light and music. I parked far enough back that he wouldn't notice and stepped out into the crowd. From across the street, I saw him. He was easy to recognize in his tailored jacket, every detail precise as always. Talon stood beside him, broad grin flashing as he told some story. And then she appeared, younger, striking, dressed as though the night was made only for her. She reached for Corbin's arm, and he let her hold it without hesitation, as if it belonged to her. The three of them moved together, their steps unhurried, their mood careless. They slipped into a bar glowing with neon, laughing before they even reached the door. I followed inside, blending into the crowd, keeping my distance while still close enough to hear. Their table was tucked in a corner, drinks already set before them. Talon leaned forward, saying something that made both Corbin and the girl laugh too loudly. I caught fragments of words, sharp and cruel. Blind, Talon said with a mocking grin. She doesn't even see it. Corbin smirked, raising his glass as if to toast the joke. The girl leaned against him, her voice sweet and cutting at the same time, adding a remark that made them all laugh harder. Every smile, every glance between them, carried truth sharper than anything Corbin had ever confessed. It wasn't only betrayal, it was amusement, the kind that came from believing I was too naive to notice. I stayed until there was no question left. Their closeness, their laughter at my expense, the way Talon encouraged it all, it painted the full picture. They were not hiding from me. They believed there was nothing to hide. I slipped back out into the night, unseen. The noise of the street wrapped around me, but my thoughts were steady. The lies had a face now. They had voices, laughter, and names. And knowing was no longer the painful part. It was the certainty that they thought I would never find out. When I realized the truth, I didn't confront him, not even once. I had learned enough to know he thrived on drama, that he wanted me broken, loud, and easy to dismiss. So instead, I gave him nothing. My face stayed calm, my words stayed even, and I allowed him to believe I was still in the dark. In private, I began to prepare. I bought a plain notebook and filled it with everything he didn't want me to see. I wrote down times he left, where he said he was going, and how long he was gone. I kept track of the numbers he dialed most often and the people he mentioned casually in passing. When I overheard conversations through the wall, I jotted down pieces of them word for word. Small details became my shield, every page of that notebook tightening the net around him. Money was the next thing I considered. Corbin always assumed I knew little about our accounts, but he underestimated me. Quietly, I began shifting things into safer places. It wasn't dramatic. I simply arranged it so I wouldn't be left stranded if he ever tried to shut me out. Each change was subtle, invisible to him, but it gave me a sense of control he couldn't take away. I also started keeping copies of things that didn't belong to me in the open. Bank slips left on the table, a stray business card tucked into his coat, an email he forgot to close. They all found their way into a folder I kept hidden. I didn't need to confront him with them yet. Just knowing I had them gave me strength. From the outside, nothing appeared different. I still played my role, greeting him when he came home, asking the usual questions, moving through the house like nothing had shifted. He believed my quiet was indifference. He never understood that my silence was deliberate, a way of studying him without revealing how much I already knew. At night, when he stayed out, I used the time for myself. I sorted my belongings, placed aside the things that were important, and made small changes he would never notice. I began planning for the future without saying a word about it. It wasn't about leaving in a rush, it was about being ready when the moment arrived. One afternoon, while browsing in a small store, I found an item that drew me in, a little wooden box with brass hinges polished smooth, fitting easily in my hands. Something about its simplicity appealed to me. I bought it on impulse, though in my mind I already knew why. That box would one day carry the truth I had gathered, the proof of everything he had done. Corbin walked around with his usual confidence, never suspecting that while he believed he was hiding secrets, I was quietly building something stronger than his lies. Every page in my notebook, every copy I tucked away, every plan I made in silence brought me closer to the moment he would finally see what I had been preparing all along. Corbin decided we would host Christmas that year. He spoke about it as if it were already settled, telling his parents, his siblings, and of course Talon. He never asked if I wanted it, but I agreed easily. He thought I was complying out of habit, the same old wife who followed along. What he didn't realize was that I welcomed the idea. A house full of people meant a stage, and he was building it for me. The days leading up to the dinner were filled with preparation. I set the table with care, polished the silver, laid out decorations he liked. Every corner of the house carried the warm look of a holiday gathering. Corbin assumed I did it for him, that I wanted to impress his family. I let him think so. He walked around with that proud smile, glancing at my work like it was proof I still belonged under his thumb. When the evening arrived, the doorbell rang in steady rhythm. His parents arrived first, carrying gifts and commenting on the tree. His brother and sister followed, cheerful and loud. They filled the living room quickly with coats, chatter, and laughter. I greeted each one with the same calm smile, never letting them sense the tension beneath. Then came Talon. He entered with his usual swagger, clapping Corbin on the shoulder as though they were the hosts together. His grin stretched wide, his voice carried across the room, and he spoke to me as if he were humoring a stranger rather than stepping into my home. Behind him was someone no one expected to see, Celine. Young, striking, dressed with care, she introduced herself smoothly as a friend of the family. Corbin's parents looked puzzled, but Corbin smoothed it over with a charm he had practiced all his life. I felt every eye flick toward me, waiting to see how I would react. Celine's smile was polite but edged, as though she knew her presence was a test. Talon watched me too, his smirk daring me to falter. Corbin hovered between them, confident, certain this night would crush me. I moved through the evening exactly as they imagined I would. I carried plates, poured wine, and asked polite questions. I kept my voice steady, my posture relaxed. No one could point to a single sign of anger. Yet beneath that quiet exterior, my thoughts were clear and steady. At the table, Corbin held himself like the man of the hour. He carved the roast, raised his glass, and steered conversations. Talon leaned back in his chair, making his usual remarks, louder than anyone else. Celine sat close, laughing lightly at their jokes, brushing crumbs from her dress with graceful hands. Between the three of them, there was a quiet rhythm, the glances, the small smirks, the satisfaction of believing they had already won. I let them have their performance. I let them laugh, exchange glances, and whisper to each other as if I were invisible. Around us, the rest of the family carried on, unaware of the undercurrent moving through the room. They thought this was just another holiday dinner. Only I knew it was the calm before the storm. And so, while the candles burned low and the music drifted softly in the background, I stayed composed. They thought they were pulling the strings, but every gesture, every smile, was mine to give, and mine to take away when the moment came. The dinner had gone on long enough for everyone to relax. Glasses were filled again, plates pushed aside, voices rising with laughter. I sat quietly, listening, waiting. Corbin was in his element, leaning back in his chair, smiling that polished smile that always fooled his family. Talon, as usual, spoke the loudest, dominating every corner of the table with his jokes. Celine lingered nearby, smiling faintly, her eyes flicking toward me more than once. It happened when the room reached its peak of noise, when everyone was comfortable enough to believe the night would end without disruption. Talon leaned forward, eyes glittering with mischief. He tapped his glass with a fork and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll bet she breaks down. The second she sees it, she'll cry." No doubt about it. The table went silent. Some chuckled nervously, others glanced in my direction. I didn't move. Corbin smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. He reached under his chair and pulled out a neat folder, crisp and ready. Without a word, he slid it across the table toward me, the motion deliberate, the moment rehearsed. The papers lay there between us, thick with legal language but simple in intent. Divorce. My name already typed in black ink, his signature scrawled confidently across the bottom. He leaned back, waiting, expecting a reaction. I felt every eye on me. His parents looked uneasy, his siblings stared with wide eyes. Even Celine tilted her head slightly, as though curious how dramatic the scene might become. Talon grinned, satisfied, certain his prediction would be fulfilled within seconds. I reached for the folder slowly, not rushing, not hesitating. I opened it, scanned the top page, then picked up the pen lying beside it. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name in the space he had left for me. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was sharp in the quiet. When I was finished, I closed the folder and slid it back toward him with a steady hand. "There," I said simply, my voice calm. "Done." The room shifted. The smug curve of Corbin's mouth wavered. Talon blinked, then laughed awkwardly, but the sound didn't carry the confidence it had before. The family exchanged uneasy looks, whispering among themselves. No tears came, no shouts, no pleading. I had given them nothing they expected. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and let the silence stretch. Then I spoke again, softly, as though announcing something ordinary. "My turn," I said. "I brought gifts." Every head turned toward me. Corbin frowned slightly, not understanding. Talon shifted in his seat. Celine's smile froze, her fingers tightening around her glass. I reached down beside me, where I had placed the small packages earlier, and set them gently on the table. Each one was wrapped carefully, tied with ribbon. I looked at the three of them in turn, then rested my hands back on the tablecloth. No one said a word. The laughter had drained away. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire in the corner, as they stared at the gifts waiting to be opened. The packages sat in the middle of the table, their ribbons neat and bright against the white cloth. For a moment, no one moved. Corbin stared at them with a puzzled look, Talon narrowed his eyes, and Celine gave a nervous laugh as if it were some kind of joke. I didn't rush them. I simply folded my hands and waited. Finally, Corbin reached forward. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of mockery. "Gifts," I said calmly. "Since it's Christmas, after all." He gave a smug smile, tugged at the ribbon, and pulled open the lid. Inside, he found a neat stack of papers. At first, he flipped through them quickly, still confident. Then his expression stiffened. Photos slid out, along with printouts of messages, dates, and times. His face lost its practiced ease. He looked up at me sharply, then back at the evidence, his throat tightening before he could find any words. The room was silent, every relative watching. His mother leaned forward to see what he was holding, her face already darkening with suspicion. Corbin shoved the lid back on the box, but it was too late. Everyone had seen enough to know it wasn't something he wanted revealed. Talon's laughter broke the tension, loud and forced. "Cute trick," he said. "What did you cook up for me, huh?" He snatched up the box I slid toward him, tearing it open with a careless grin. But when he saw what was inside, the grin froze. Documents, numbers, and signed transfers stared back at him. Proof of money quietly moved from Corbin's company into accounts with Talon's name. His hands clenched the edges of the papers, knuckles white, eyes darting around the table. Corbin caught sight of it, his jaw tightening, his voice low with fury. "What is that?" Talon stammered, trying to form an explanation, but nothing came. The family watched him in stunned silence, the weight of what he had done hanging in the air. His arrogance had drained away, leaving only panic in his face. Celine shifted in her chair, uneasy. She tried to mask it with a faint smile, though her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. I slid her box across. Her hesitation showed before she even touched it. Finally, she lifted the lid. Inside was something small and simple, a test wrapped in tissue. She froze as soon as she saw it. Her breath caught. Color drained from her face. The room grew colder, heavier, while everyone leaned forward to understand what it meant. Corbin looked at her, confusion clouding his anger. She shook her head quickly, stammering, but the truth was written all over her pale face. The silence that followed was sharper than any words. In that moment, no one laughed. No one dared speak. The three of them sat exposed at the table, stripped of their smugness, their secrets scattered in front of everyone to see. For a few long seconds, the dining room stayed still, heavy with the truth hanging in the air. Then the silence broke all at once. Corbin's mother pushed back her chair so hard it scraped the floor. Her voice rose sharp and furious, accusing him of disgracing the family. His father's face burned red as he demanded answers, his words cutting into the quiet with pure disappointment. Corbin tried to speak, but every attempt was drowned by his parents' anger. His mother pointed at the box in front of him, her hands trembling as she asked how he could betray his wife, his vows, and his family in one stroke. He stammered, his lips moving without sound, before muttering half-excuses that no one wanted to hear. Across the table, Talon sat frozen, the papers of stolen money still in his grip. The confidence he always wore had vanished. His wife, seated just a few chairs away, leaned forward to look at what he held. Her face shifted from confusion to horror as she realized what it meant. With shaking hands, she shoved her chair back and rose to her feet. Her voice cracked as she shouted at him, demanding to know how long it had gone on. Talon reached for her arm, but she pulled away, her eyes full of betrayal. Without waiting for an explanation, she stormed out, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound of the front door slamming shut left an emptiness behind that no one dared fill. Celine sat stiff, her eyes darting between Corbin and me. Her mask had already slipped, the small test still visible in the open box. When Corbin turned toward her, demanding in a low, furious voice to know if it was true, she didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her coat, rose quickly, and fled the room, her heels striking the floor in a frantic rhythm. The door closed hard behind her, leaving a silence almost louder than the shouting. The table was chaos. Corbin's siblings whispered in disbelief, some refusing to look at him, others glaring. His parents were still furious, their voices filling the room with condemnation. Corbin tried to defend himself, holding up his hands, promising to explain, but every word fell flat. No one wanted his explanations anymore. Through it all, I sat still, calm, a glass of wine in my hand. I sipped slowly, watching the storm around me unfold, as though I were no longer part of it. The folder of divorce papers lay on the table in front of Corbin, signed and ready. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence spoke louder than their chaos. When I finally rose from my chair, no one stopped me. I smoothed the folds of my dress, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. Behind me, the shouting continued, a mixture of anger, shame, and panic. I left the papers where they were, neatly in place, a quiet ending to a loud evening. I stepped outside into the cold night air, the noise of the house fading behind me, and walked away with steady steps, leaving them to choke on the ruin they had created. The cold air outside felt cleaner than anything I had breathed in years. I walked without looking back, the sound of my heels steady on the quiet street. For the first time in a long while, my chest wasn't tight. The weight I had carried for months had finally slipped away. Days later, the storm inside that house spread beyond its walls. Corbin's family no longer stood behind him. His parents, embarrassed and furious, distanced themselves. The business he guarded so proudly began to falter when whispers of Talon's thefts surfaced. Clients pulled back, trust dissolved, and the shine he loved so much dulled in public view. Talon had his own battles. The numbers and signatures I placed in front of him did not vanish once dinner ended. Lawyers became involved, questions were asked, and his arrogance turned into fear. His charm no longer shielded him. The damage was too clear. Celine was gone almost as quickly as she had arrived. No one heard from her after that night. Her name faded into nothing, just another shadow in a long line of mistakes. Through it all, I kept to myself. I did not chase revenge further, nor did I gloat. My part was already done. My dignity remained untouched, and that was enough. I focused on the simple things I had ignored for too long. Mornings without tension, quiet meals, evenings that ended in peace instead of arguments. There was a strange beauty in starting over. I no longer needed to explain myself or wait for someone else's approval. My time was mine again, my choices my own. I wasn't rushing into anything new, only learning to enjoy the calm of my own company. Every so often I thought of that night. The shocked faces, the silence after the truth came out, the way they had expected me to break down in front of them. But I hadn't. I carried myself out with steady steps, and that image stayed with me like a shield. They thought I would crumble. They thought I would beg. But I didn't. I left the ruin behind and walked into a life that was finally mine. They expected my tears. Instead, I gave them the truth.